How on earth did they get there? It's a question that has haunted boardrooms, parliaments, and dinner tables for centuries. You look at the person in charge, maybe a CEO whose company is plummeting, a politician whose policies defy logic, or a leader whose charisma seems inversely proportional to their competence. And you wonder what cosmic joke put them in charge. Is the world truly so random, or is there a deeper, more unsettling logic at play? Let's start by taking a stroll through history's Hall of Fame and infamy. Consider Nero, the Roman emperor, whose reign was marked by extravagance, cruelty, and if the stories are to be believed, a penchant for fiddling while Rome burned. Fast forward to the modern era, and we find Elizabeth Holmes, the Silicon Valley wunderkind, who captivated investors with promises of revolutionizing blood testing, only to be unmasked as the architect of one of the most audacious frauds in recent memory. These are not isolated cases. The corridors of power are littered with the remains of grand visions gone awry, often helmed by individuals whose talents seem better suited for theatre than governance. But let's not be too hasty to judge. Perhaps as Machiavelli argued in The Prince, the problem is not that these individuals lack ability, but that they possess a different kind of ability, one that is perfectly adapted to the brutal zero-sum game of acquiring and maintaining power. Machiavelli, ever the pragmatist, warned us against confusing virtue with effectiveness. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. He wrote a sentiment that has echoed through the centuries in every ruthless boardroom maneuver and political backstab. What Machiavelli understood, and what many of us are reluctant to admit, is that power is rarely awarded to the most virtuous, the most intelligent, or even the most competent. Instead, it is often seized by those who are most adept at projecting the illusion of competence. In a world obsessed with image where perception often trumps reality, the ability to craft and maintain a compelling persona can be far more valuable than actual expertise. The philosopher Jean Baudrillard once mused that we live in an age of simulacra where the copy becomes more real than the original. Nowhere is this more evident than in the theatre of power, where the appearance of leadership can be mistaken for the substance of it. But why do we fall for it? Why do we time and again entrust our fortunes to those whose main qualification seems to be their confidence, their charisma, or their sheer audacity? The answer, I suspect, lies in our own psychology. We are hardwired to respond to signals of authority, to gravitate toward those who seem certain, decisive, and untroubled by doubt. In times of uncertainty, we crave the illusion of control, even if it is only that, an illusion. Consider the infamous Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias identified by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger. Their research revealed that people with low ability at a task are often the most likely to overestimate their competence, while those with high ability are more likely to underestimate themselves. In other words, the less you know, the more you think you know, a dangerous combination when it comes to leadership. This effect is not limited to individuals. It can infect entire organizations, creating cultures where bluster is rewarded and humility is mistaken for weakness. And so the paradox persists. The very qualities that make someone good at getting power are often the same qualities that make them bad at wielding it. The world, it seems, is not a meritocracy, but a stage one where the best actors often win the biggest prizes. As Shakespeare wrote, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." The tragedy is that we often choose the former to lead us. But before we resign ourselves to cynicism, let's dig deeper. Is there a way to break this cycle? Can we learn to distinguish between the appearance of competence and the real thing? Or are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes generation after generation as new Neros and Holmeses rise to take the stage? Ask yourself, have you ever worked in an organization where asking questions was discouraged, where dissent was punished, and where the loudest voice always seemed to win? If so, you have witnessed the machinery of power at work, a machinery that, unless we understand it, will continue to produce the same results. Let's pause for a moment and consider a provocative question. What if intelligence is not the golden ticket to power we imagine it to be? What if in the ruthless game of leadership, being too smart is actually a liability? It sounds counterintuitive, even heretical in a world that worships at the altar of IQ. But history and psychology suggest that the relationship between intelligence and power is far more complicated and far less flattering than we'd like to believe. Take Socrates, the father of Western philosophy. His relentless questioning, his refusal to accept easy answers, and his insistence on exposing ignorance made him a legend and ultimately a martyr. Socrates was not a man who craved power. In fact, his wisdom lay in his awareness of his own ignorance. "I know that I know nothing," he famously declared. Yet it was precisely this humility, this intellectual honesty, that made him dangerous to the powerful. Socrates was executed not because he was wrong, but because he made those in power uncomfortable. His intelligence, far from being an asset in the pursuit of authority, was a threat to it. Contrast this with the populist leaders of our age, those who thrive not on nuance or complexity, but on certainty and simplicity. The modern world is full of politicians and executives who rise to power by offering easy answers to difficult questions, by projecting confidence rather than competence. The philosopher Isaiah Berlin distinguished between the fox who knows many things and the hedgehog who knows one big thing. In the realm of power, it is often the hedgehogs, those with a single, unwavering vision, who prevail. The foxes, with their endless questions and doubts, are left on the sidelines. But why is this so? Why do organizations, societies, and even entire civilizations so often overlook the thoughtful in favor of the brash? The answer in part lies in the way intelligence manifests itself. True intelligence is rarely loud. It is skeptical, self-critical, and allergic to dogma. The intelligent leader is more likely to say, "I don't know," to seek out dissenting opinions, and to change course when the evidence demands it. These are admirable qualities in a philosopher, a scientist, or a judge, but they are often fatal in the blood sport of politics and business. Research backs this up. Studies on leadership and intelligence, such as those conducted by Timothy A. Judge and colleagues, have found that while there is a positive correlation between intelligence and leadership effectiveness, the relationship is far from linear. In fact, leaders who are significantly more intelligent than their followers often struggle to communicate, to inspire, and to build consensus. Their ideas may be brilliant, but they are often lost in translation. The very complexity that makes them insightful can make them appear aloof, indecisive, or out of touch. Moreover, intelligence brings with it a burden, the burden of doubt. The smarter you are, the more aware you become of what you don't know. This can lead to hesitation, to second-guessing, to a reluctance to act without perfect information. In a world that rewards decisiveness, however misguided, this can be a fatal flaw. As Voltaire quipped, "Doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is absurd. Yet in the marketplace of power, it is certainty, not doubt, that commands the highest price." Let's look at a modern example. Consider the fate of innovative thinkers in large corporations. How often do we see brilliant engineers, scientists, or analysts passed over for promotion in favor of those who are less technically gifted but more politically savvy? The answer, sadly, is all too often. The skills that make someone a great thinker, curiosity, skepticism, a willingness to challenge the status quo, are not always the skills that make someone a great leader in the eyes of those who do the promoting. Instead, organizations reward those who play the game, who conform, who project confidence and stability, even if that confidence is unwarranted. This is not to say that intelligence is irrelevant, far from it, but it is to say that intelligence alone is not enough. In the contest for power, it is often the packaging, not the product, that matters most. The world is full of smart people with no influence and influential people with little wisdom. The two are not mutually exclusive, but neither are they synonymous. So what are we to make of this? Should we abandon the pursuit of intelligence in our leaders? Should we settle for the loudest, the boldest, the most self-assured? Of course not. But we should be honest about the limitations of intelligence as a path to power. We should recognize that the qualities that make someone wise are not always the qualities that make them powerful, and that sometimes the very things that make a person good at wielding power are the things that make them dangerous. Ask yourself, have you ever watched a meeting where the smartest person in the room was ignored while the most confident person carried the day? Have you ever wondered why the best ideas so often die in committee while the worst ones are implemented with gusto? If so, you have glimpsed the paradox at the heart of power, a paradox that, unless we confront it, will continue to shape our world in ways both subtle and profound. Let's turn the spotlight from the stage of history to the theater of the mind. Why is it that time after time we find ourselves following those who radiate confidence even when their competence is questionable at best. Is there some flaw in our collective judgment, or is this simply human nature at work, playing out patterns etched deep into our psychology and social fabric? To answer this, we must revisit the Dunning-Kruger effect, a phenomenon as amusing as it is alarming. In their seminal 1999 study, psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger demonstrated that people with low ability in a given domain are not only poor performers, they are also blissfully unaware of their own incompetence. This ignorance breeds a peculiar kind of confidence, a swagger born not of mastery but of obliviousness. The less they know, the less they realize what they don't know. Meanwhile, those with genuine expertise are often plagued by doubt, acutely aware of the vastness of their own ignorance. Ironically, it is the confident incompetents who are most likely to put themselves forward for leadership roles, while the truly capable hold back, wary of overstepping their limits. But the Dunning-Kruger effect is only the beginning. Consider the case of Adam Neumann, the charismatic founder of WeWork. Neumann's vision for a global co-working empire was matched only by his self-assurance. Investors, employees, and the media were swept up in his enthusiasm, overlooking glaring flaws in the company's business model. It was not until the house of cards collapsed that the world realized just how little substance there was beneath the surface. Neumann is not unique. The business world is replete with leaders whose confidence far outstrips their competence. Masayoshi Son, the CEO of SoftBank, famously invested billions in startups based more on gut feeling and founder charisma than on sound business fundamentals, sometimes with disastrous results. What is it about confidence that so captivates us? The answer lies in the way our brains are wired. In uncertain situations, we instinctively look to those who seem sure of themselves. Confidence acts as a social signal, a shortcut our minds use to assess leadership potential. In evolutionary terms, following a decisive leader could mean the difference between survival and extinction. As psychologist Thomas Chamorro Premuzic writes, "When it comes to leadership selection, we are fooled by confidence more often than we are by competence. This bias is reinforced by the phenomenon of cognitive closure, our desire for clear, unambiguous answers in a complex world. Leaders who project certainty, who offer simple solutions to complicated problems, are rewarded with trust and authority. Never mind that their certainty may be misplaced. In the marketplace of ideas, clarity sells better than nuance. The populist leader who promises easy fixes is often more appealing than the expert who cautions that the truth is messy and the solutions are hard." Narcissism also plays a role. Narcissistic individuals are drawn to positions of power, and their self-regard can be mistaken for vision and strength. Studies by organizational psychologist Michael Machiavelli and others have found that narcissists are overrepresented among corporate leaders and politicians. Their grandiosity charm and willingness to bend the rules can propel them to the top, even as their lack of empathy and self-awareness ultimately undermines those they lead. But let's not be too quick to blame the leaders alone. The real question is, why do we keep choosing them? The answer, uncomfortable as it may be, is that we are complicit. We reward confidence even when it is unearned. We equate decisiveness with wisdom, charisma with competence, and certainty with truth. We are drawn to those who tell us what we want to hear rather than what we need to hear. Consider the classic social psychology experiment by Solomon Asch, in which participants were asked to judge the length of lines on a card. When Confederates in the group confidently gave the wrong answer, many participants went along with the group, doubting their own perceptions. The lesson is clear. In the face of confident assertion, even our own senses can be overridden. This dynamic plays out in organizations large and small. The executive who speaks with conviction, who never admits doubt, who always has an answer. However wrong is more likely to be promoted than the thoughtful skeptic. The culture of fake it till you make it rewards those who can project assurance even in the absence of understanding. The result is a leadership class that is often long on confidence and short on competence. So, what can be done? The first step is to recognize the bias. Confidence is not a substitute for competence, and decisiveness is not the same as wisdom. We must learn to distinguish between those who know and those who only think they know. We must reward humility, encourage dissent, and value the quiet voices as much as the loud ones. Ask yourself, have you ever found yourself agreeing with someone simply because they seemed so sure of themselves? Have you ever doubted your own judgment in the face of another's certainty? If so, you are not alone. We are all susceptible to the allure of confidence, but awareness is the first step toward resistance. If you've ever wondered why once installed the less competent seem to cling to power with the tenacity of a barnacle on a ship's hull, you're not alone. The ascent of the unqualified is one thing, but their uncanny ability to entrench themselves at the top is another paradox entirely. It's as if the very skills that propelled them into power become the tools with which they fortify their position, often at the expense of the organization, the nation, or the community they are meant to serve. Let's start with a phenomenon as old as leadership itself, the art of picking subordinates. Incompetent leaders, whether in business or politics, have a well-documented tendency to surround themselves with individuals who are less capable than themselves. This is not mere coincidence. It is a deliberate strategy, a form of self-preservation. After all, if you are insecure about your own abilities, the last thing you want is a deputy who might outshine you. Better to build a court of loyalists, yes-men and sycophants, those who owe their positions not to merit, but to their willingness to flatter and obey. This creates what might be called an island of incompetence, an insulated environment where dissent is stifled and mediocrity is normalized. The sociologist Robert Michels, in his classic work Political Parties, described this process as the iron law of oligarchy. The tendency of organizations, regardless of their original ideals, to evolve into self-perpetuating cliques. Once established, these cliques become resistant to change, hostile to outsiders, and adept at protecting their own interests. Take, for example, the political landscapes of certain countries where leaders have remained in office for decades, not because of their visionary policies or administrative prowess, but because they have mastered the dark arts of patronage and purges. In Brazil, for instance, periods of political turmoil have often seen the rise of leaders who consolidate power by rewarding loyalty over competence, reshuffling cabinets and sidelining critics. In Zimbabwe, the long rule of Robert Mugabe was marked by the systematic dismantling of institutions that might have challenged his authority. These are extreme cases, but the underlying logic is universal power once acquired is guarded jealously, even if it means sacrificing the very qualities that make for effective leadership. But the machinery of power is not limited to politics. In the corporate world, the same dynamics play out with uncanny regularity. Consider the fate of whistleblowers, those brave souls who dare to speak truth to power. More often than not, they are marginalized, demoted, or dismissed, while the architects of failure are rewarded for their loyalty to the status quo. The message is clear: in the kingdom of the incompetent, competence is a threat. This brings us to the concept of homophily, the tendency of individuals to associate with others who are similar to themselves. In the context of leadership, homophily can create echo chambers where ideas are recycled, innovation is stifled, and groupthink reigns supreme. The psychologist Irving Janis coined the term groupthink to describe the disastrous consequences of this dynamic, from the Bay of Pigs invasion to the Challenger disaster. When everyone in the room thinks alike, no one is thinking very much at all. The spread of incompetence through an organization or society is not unlike the spread of a virus. It is contagious, self-reinforcing, and difficult to eradicate. Once established, it creates a culture where mediocrity is rewarded, risk-taking is punished, and the pursuit of excellence is seen as a threat. The result is a downward spiral, a race to the bottom, in which the least capable rise to the top and the most capable are driven out or silenced. But why does this happen? Partly, it is a matter of self-interest. Incompetent leaders are acutely aware of their own vulnerabilities, and they act to neutralize potential rivals before those rivals can act against them. This often means promoting those who are loyal rather than those who are talented, and punishing those who dare to question the prevailing orthodoxy. Over time, this creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. The organization becomes less and less capable, and the leader's position becomes more and more secure. There is also a psychological dimension, the need for cognitive closure. The desire for certainty, stability, and predictability leads people to prefer leaders who offer simple answers and clear hierarchies. Incompetent leaders excel at providing this illusion of order, even as they sow chaos beneath the surface. Their confidence, their decisiveness, and their willingness to silence dissent create a veneer of strength that is deeply reassuring to those who crave certainty. And yet the cost is high. Organizations and societies that fall into the trap of incompetent leadership pay a steep price: stagnation, corruption, and decline. The best and brightest are driven away, innovation withers, and the future is mortgaged for the sake of short-term stability. The lesson is clear. If uncomfortable, the machinery of power is designed not to reward competence, but to perpetuate itself. Unless we understand this machinery and find ways to disrupt it, we will continue to be ruled by those who are least qualified to lead. So ask yourself, have you ever seen a talented colleague sidelined because they threatened the boss? Have you ever wondered why mediocrity seems to rise to the top while excellence is punished? If so, you have witnessed the machinery of power in action, a machinery that, unless we dismantle it, will continue to produce the same dismal results. If the machinery of power is so adept at perpetuating itself, if incompetence once installed breeds more incompetence, then the natural question is, what can we do about it? Are we doomed to live under the reign of the self-assured but ill-equipped, or is there a way to disrupt this cycle and restore substance to the summit of leadership? Let's begin with the individual. The first and most radical act is intellectual humility. In a world that rewards bravado, it takes courage to say, "I don't know." But this simple admission is the foundation of wisdom. Socrates, as we have seen, was revered not for his answers, but for his questions. To cultivate humility is to inoculate oneself against the Dunning-Kruger effect, to recognize the limits of one's knowledge and to remain open to learning. Hand in hand with humility comes critical thinking. In an age of information overload, the ability to sift fact from fiction, signal from noise, is more valuable than ever. We must train ourselves and our children not merely to accept what is said, but to interrogate it, to ask for evidence, to consider alternative perspectives. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman, in his work on cognitive biases, has shown how easily we are misled by our own minds. The antidote is vigilance, a willingness to question, to challenge, to dissent. But individual virtues, while necessary, are not sufficient. The structures within which we operate must also change. Transparency is key. When decisions are made in the open, when processes are subject to scrutiny, it becomes harder for incompetence to hide behind a facade of confidence. Organizations must foster cultures where dissent is not punished but welcomed, where whistleblowers are protected rather than persecuted, and where the best ideas, regardless of their source, rise to the top. Diversity of thought is another crucial ingredient. Homophily, as we have seen, breeds stagnation. By bringing together people with different backgrounds, experiences, and viewpoints, we create the conditions for innovation and resilience. The political scientist Scott Page has argued persuasively that diverse groups outperform homogeneous ones not because they are smarter, but because they are better at solving complex problems. The challenge is to resist the temptation of comfort and familiarity and to embrace the discomfort of difference. Checks and balances are essential at every level. In politics, this means robust institutions, free media, and an engaged citizenry. In business, it means independent boards, transparent audits, and mechanisms for accountability. Power left unchecked will always tend towards self-preservation. Only by building in safeguards, by ensuring that no one is above question, can we prevent the entrenchment of incompetence. Education, too, must play its part. We must teach not only skills and knowledge, but also the habits of mind that make for good judgment, curiosity, skepticism, empathy, and courage. The philosopher John Stuart Mill wrote that he who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. To understand the world, we must be willing to listen to those who disagree with us, to entertain the possibility that we might be wrong. Finally, we must reclaim the meaning of leadership itself. True leadership is not about domination, but about service. It is not about projecting certainty, but about navigating uncertainty with integrity. The best leaders are those who empower others, who create environments where talent can flourish, and who are willing to step aside when someone better suited comes along. This is not a utopian vision, it is a practical necessity. The challenges we face, climate change, inequality, technological disruption, are too great to be solved by the confident but incompetent. We need leaders who are wise enough to know what they don't know, brave enough to seek out dissent, and humble enough to admit when they are wrong. So what can you do? Start by cultivating humility and critical thinking in your own life. Support organizations and leaders who value transparency, diversity, and accountability. Speak up when you see incompetence rewarded and excellence punished. And above all, refuse to be seduced by the siren song of certainty. As the philosopher Alan Watts observed, the more a thing tends to be permanent, the more it tends to be lifeless. Let us choose life with all its messiness, ambiguity, and possibility. Understanding the darkness doesn't mean surrendering to it, it means gaining the power to create light. The world will always have its Neros and its Holmeses, its Neumanns and its sycophants. But it will also have its Socrateses, its whistleblowers, its quiet geniuses working in the shadows. The task before us is to bring those voices into the light to build systems that reward substance over show, and to remember that true power lies not in the ability to command, but in the willingness to listen, to learn, and to lead with wisdom. Ask yourself one last time, what kind of leader do you want to follow? What kind of leader do you want to be?